Hi guys, I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of The Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 8, the mid-season finale, Hearts Still Beating. And after half a season of Negan murdering Glenn and Abraham, kidnapping Daryl, threatening Carl, stealing all their guns, and making Rick thank him for all of it, Rick decides that Negan has finally gone too far and needs to be dealt with because he killed the woman in charge of food and the shitty mama's boy who tried to betray him. Okay, that's it. We're going to war. War, Carl! But I was actually really happy with how these last two episodes ended up and the direction that the series is going. So there's a lot to talk about, stuff that you might have missed, a few questions that you might have, and I'm gonna get into all of it. So let's get started with these opening images. So we open on Maggie at the graves of Glenn and Abraham at the hilltop. And we've gone several weeks of trying to move on from Glenn and Abraham's deaths, but this episode specifically wants to bring us back to that moment. So everything about Maggie here is designed to evoke Glenn. She actually kind of looks like Glenn wearing the hat like that. I think that's intentional. In the early days of the series, before meeting Maggie, Glenn wore this hat everywhere, and it wasn't until Maggie took off the hat that he stopped wearing it. So clearly, Maggie is honoring her late husband here. Also, Maggie climbs to this lookout post and gazes out into the distance exactly like she did last season in Alexandria. Remember when Glenn was resurrecting under a dumpster? It's almost as if part of Maggie is hoping that Glenn will come back to her, and it's kind of a sweet moment, and I'll talk more about it later. Now, notice this moment when Maggie takes Gregory's apple. One cool thing that struck me about this episode was the way it uses food. Pretty much every storyline features food in some way, and I'm not just talking about the usual Walker food of human beings, but I'm talking pie, spaghetti, peanut butter, pomegranate seeds. What does this smorgasbord mean? Well, in this episode, food is used to symbolize power and control. So when characters take or steal food, they're seizing control from someone else. But when food is willingly offered, characters are trying to sneakily control others by putting them in their debt. Basically that old adage of there's no such thing as a free lunch. And this keeps coming up a lot, so I'll come back to it, but in this moment, Gregory doesn't want to give Maggie the apple. She forces it away from him, with this other Hilltopper scolding Gregory for withholding food from a pregnant woman. Maggie demonstrates that the Hilltoppers are on her side, taking the apple and Gregory's power. I eat your apple. And then later, Maggie double downs on this control, gobbling down even more of Gregory's apples in this apple pie that the Hilltoppers made for her. So this isn't just the typical food cravings of a pregnant woman, she's further extending her control over the hilltop. Now, this episode jumps around a lot before all the shit goes down in Alexandria, so I'm just gonna go storyline by storyline and break down each character's arc. So let's start with Negan shaving in Rick's bathroom, with Jeffrey Dean Morgan finally getting that clean-shaven look that Negan has in the comics. Remember, in the last breakdown, I talked about how Negan was trying to play mind games by replacing Rick in his family unit, corrupting that sense of domesticity. And now we see him continuing that, shaving his beard exactly like how Rick shaved his beard back in season 5. In both of these moments, a new sheriff had come to town, resulting in both sheriffs going on a power trip and getting those clean-shaven faces covered in some asshole's blood. He also gives Carl this advice.
Against the grain, kid. Always against the grain.
Now, I've never shaved myself. I've had this scruff since I was a baby. But when you shave, you can either shave with the grain in the direction that your hair grows to avoid bumps, but if you want a closer shave, you really should shave against the grain, even though that might cause some irritation. And I think Negan saying this could be a metaphor of his unique leadership style. He doesn't mind people who go against the grain, people who break the rules and irritate him, as long as it shows guts and courage. To him, that results in a smoother relationship. What he hates is when people try too hard to placate him and please him, these sycophants who try to take the easy way out, going with the grain. Negan prefers a little fight. And then, of course, we get another example of food representing control, with Negan offering Carl a taste of his spaghetti sauce. This whole meal is just a manipulative mind game by Negan. Carl, Olivia, and Judith aren't dinner guests, they're really terrified captives. Okay, now let's move on to Rick and Aaron as they paddle out to that boat. I like how Aaron uses the plank from the sign we saw in last episode, and if you look closely, the words on each of their paddles are "I am dead" for Rick and "have at it assholes" for Aaron. And each of these phrases reflect their mental states at the top of this episode. So Rick is still affected by Michonne's words in episode 4. He's wondering what kind of life this is, and he feels like a hollow, dead person under Negan's oppressive rule. But Aaron feels the opposite, that as long as he's still alive, things are still worth fighting for, even if it means he has to scavenge for stuff and say to the saviors, "Okay, have at it, assholes." And that is why, as they load up the truck later, Aaron says the words that inspire the episode's title, Hearts Still Beating.
But either your heart's beating or it isn't. Your loved ones' hearts are beating or they aren't. We take what they give us. so that we can live.
And Aaron repeats this later on after the Saviors jump him for pretty much no reason.
My heart's still beating, right?
Aaron is helping Rick understand that their lives don't have to be over. But before I move on, a few things that I really need to point out about the storyline. First, a lot of people are saying that that floating walker with the beard is Walking Dead comic creator Robert Kirkman, and even though he kind of looks like him, another angle from the behind the scenes clip shows that that is clearly not Robert Kirkman. But really, this storyline also leaves us with some of the biggest mysteries of this episode. What is the meaning of the note saying congrats on winning, but you still lose? Why is there no ammo in these guns? And most importantly, who is this mystery person in boots stalking Rick and Aaron, who we see at the end of this scene and later spying on Alexandria in the post-credit scene? Okay, so I have a few theories on this. One is that this is all an elaborate obstacle course trap laid by that crazy survivalist guy from The Sign, Leslie William Starton. Like, notice how he left a rowboat filled with bullet holes that would last you just long enough to make it to a canoe with floating walker traps that you have to navigate through, with the reward of tons of guns with no ammo. That all seems weirdly laid out and intentional. And the thought is that this mystery man would want to lure in scavengers who are just desperate enough for guns so he could follow them back to their homes, which would make some thematic sense because we would see that in Rick's case, again, there is no such thing as a free lunch. But then another theory is that whoever left this stuff is just dead and whoever's watching them is just someone else unrelated to the boat. So for example, Cindy from Oceanside. The person in the post-credit scene has hands that a lot of people are saying look like they belong to a woman, but Cindy wasn't wearing those boots in episode 6. And both these scenes, I think, really want these boots to be memorable and iconic. Another theory that I'm kind of leaning towards is that this could be a survivor of Negan's massacre of all the men from Oceanside. This guy might have escaped with like a ton of guns and became like a hermit on this houseboat. Other people are saying that this character could belong to another group from the comics called the Whisperers, which I don't want to say too much about yet, but I don't think this is them because there are just so many things that happen in the comics between now and when the Whisperers show up, and the Whisperers are really cool characters, and this wouldn't be the most exciting way to introduce them on the show, so just trust me on this. Anyway, whoever this is, I'm betting it's a new character because there is nothing in the comics anything like this storyline. And it might be possible that this person is just keeping a ton of ammo in a separate location, and he or she is going to end up being kind of an ace in the hole for Rick. Maybe arming him in his coming war with the Saviors, or linking him with Oceanside, which also has a ton of guns and would be doing the same thing. Or, I don't know, maybe it's Beth. Hashtag Beth lives, hashtag Beth in boots. But let's move on to Carol and Morgan's storyline. So that idea of food representing control is all over the place in this scene, starting with this close-up of pomegranate seeds. Remember, in my breakdown of episode 2, I talked about how King Ezekiel used pomegranates to try to seduce Carol into staying in his kingdom. But now, this fruit, along with other food Ezekiel and Richard have brought, and the fruit Morgan brings her, is all another example of characters using offerings of food to try to control people. And then of course Carol refuses because she doesn't want to be controlled. She wants to be on her own. And then later on in this storyline, Carol and Morgan refuse Richard, begging them to convince Ezekiel to attack the Saviors, Carol wanting to stay out of the conflict, and Morgan worried about future loss of life. Now Carol and Morgan still both believe what Rick, Spencer, Gregory, Ezekiel, and others believe, that a lasting, peaceful arrangement can be made with the Saviors that will prevent people from dying. But remember, Carol and Morgan still have no idea that Glenn and Abraham are dead. So as Maggie, Sasha, Rosita, Daryl, Michonne, and Richard here know full well, and as Rick's about to find out, peace with the Saviors just isn't possible. They're just too sadistic and erratic. They kill innocent non-participants without warning, and you can't build trust with people like that. So we'll see if Carol and Morgan's opinions change when they catch up on current events. And before I move on, we get a quick scene later with Richard in a secret trailer in the woods, crying over non-existent milk. Seriously, what the hell is going on here? Richard did mention that he lost people.
I lost people.
And my theory is that this is a place that he used to live in before joining the kingdom, and he's checking back on it just in case his people that he lost, maybe a family member, have returned. Now, I don't think he's the Phantom of the Boots, but if you give a shit about this guy, let me know what you think his deal is. Okay, moving on to Daryl's storyline. So after using the key and the go know now note that slipped to him last episode, he hides in this room and devours peanut butter. Again, taking food means a character is seizing control. And for the first time in a while, Daryl is fully in charge of his own fate. And in case you didn't catch this, Daryl, looking at these card figurines, signals to him that this is Dwight's room. Because remember, we saw Dwight carving these at the beginning of episode 3, and Dwight actually gave Daryl one of these figurines last season to trade for Tina's insulin. And speaking of Dwight, this episode really didn't underline this, but I think we have an answer to who slipped Daryl that key. Now, last episode I was leaning towards Jesus, but also speculated that it could have been Sherry, but now I'm pretty sure that it was Dwight. Because Dwight took Daryl's motorcycle in episode 4, and now Daryl has the key to it, which I'm assuming was the same key on that note, and that Dwight was the one who gave it to him. Now, we know Dwight freaking hates Negan, and on some level, he might respect Daryl for standing up to him. Enough to help him escape, maybe? I don't know, we'll see. Now, I know a lot of people were shocked by Daryl murdering Fat Joey after he surrendered, but Daryl definitely has his reasons. Remember in that season 6 episode with Dwight and Sherry, saviors have fed Daryl empty promises before, totally screwing him over. And I'm sure Daryl hasn't forgiven or forgotten Fat Joey for beating the crap out of him in episode 3. But Daryl cements his reasons with this line.
It ain't just about getting by here. It's about getting it all.
So Fat Joey was reasoning that there's a commonality between them, that they're both just following orders and doing what it takes to get by and survive. But Daryl sees this as more of an us versus them deal. So just like Rosita and Michonne and the others, Daryl knows that war is inevitable, and there's no sense in trying to see your common humanity with the other side. And speaking of Michonne, let's talk about her storyline here. So she spends most of this episode with this savior Isabel on a road trip to Negan. And in her first scene, Michonne says that her goal is to find a weakness in the saviors just for herself.
I'm gonna change how this ends for me.
In other words, she's in this alone. But then in the later scene, Michonne looks down at this massive savior camp and she realizes how outnumbered her people are and that she can't do this alone. And I'll come back to that idea, but a lot of people were wondering whether Michonne actually killed the savior. And if you look closely in this wide shot, you can definitely make out a gunshot going off in the car as Isabel's frame slumps down. Also, did anyone else find it weird for Michonne to just quickly hop behind the wheel with a dead body still in the seat? Michonne, you know you can like pop open the door and shove that body out first. Okay, moving on to Rosita, who we first see with the bullet Eugene made for her, waiting for her moment to shoot Negan. And notice what Rosita says when Gabriel asks her why it has to be her to go on this suicide mission.
If Abraham was alive, we could fight. If Glenn was, Maggie's kid would have a father. Michonne and Carl can fight. They have Rick. Aaron has Erik. Eugene knows things. Daryl's strong.
And of course, she left out Donatello, who does machines.
Donatello does machines!
And Rosita's implying that she has no important function to the group, and it would have been better if Negan clobbered her instead. But also, this is a callback to her line to Spencer early last season.
This group, Abraham in this place, make sure you got something worth dying for.
Rosita now feels a bit lost, that without Abraham, she has no one to die for, and thus no one to live for. And then Gabriel telling her that they need her might be why Rosita seems to have a bit of a change of heart when she talks to Spencer a short while later. Now, it's easy to forget that these two were a thing for a little while, and Rosita doesn't want to feel like she's drifting alone anymore. She wants to have someone to die for. And Spencer revealing to her that he actually has a long-term plan to strike Negan further down the road reopens the door to actually having some kind of future with Spencer. A future that, of course, will never happen. Because let's talk about Spencer this episode. From the very beginning, we can see Spencer trying to play the game with the saviors, shaking their hands, flirting back with this savior woman who flirts with him, and notice again,
Maybe I'll buy you a sandwich.
which is another example of someone offering food as a way to control them. And after we see Spencer working up the guts to talk to Negan, changing into this new sharp outfit, a gray shirt with khakis. Great choice. He makes this same move back with Negan, trying to get in his good graces by offering him nourishment in the form of booze. And from the moment Spencer sits down with Negan, anyone who read the comics or picked up on my dumb jokes all season long knew where this was going. Spencer tries to buddy up with Negan, asking him to replace Rick with himself, and Negan spills his guts everywhere. Ugh. And just like with the season premiere, the show found a way to make this scene in the comics even more disgusting. In the comics, Negan swung the knife to slash through Spencer's stomach, but here he stabs him from close range and the guts spill out like piñata candy.
Yay!
Oof, barf, that is almost as gross as... Oh God, I was going to set it up. I was going to set it up. And as we saw last episode, some of the best dialogue here is just taken directly from the comics.
He is swallowing his hate and getting shit done.
That takes guts.
You got no guts.
There they are. They were inside you the whole time. You did have guts. I've never been so wrong in my whole life.
But there are two key differences. One, Negan and Spencer aren't playing pool yet in the comics, they're just on their way to. And two, in the comics, it's Carl who shoots Lucille in a shootout that happens a little while later, not Rosita. So when Lucille gets hit, Negan snaps, and we've never seen him this truly angry before. But notice how quickly he collects himself, focusing instead on the real matter at hand. Someone made this bullet. And Negan's ability to control his emotion like this is another example of his psychopathic tendencies. If someone tried to shoot Rick or anyone else on this show, they would have put down the shooter immediately, no questions asked. But Negan's psycho enough to restrain himself, because freaking out isn't really Negan's style. This is Negan's style.
Kill somebody.
It was me! No!
Ah, damn it. R.I.P. Olivia. We knew ye just enough to care about ye when ye died. My big question here is, why does Negan kill Spencer and Olivia, but not kill Rosita or Carl for that matter? So Negan killing Spencer connects back to that against the grain idea. Negan admires Carl and Rosita for surprising him with how much guts they have, trying to kill him. Rosita even doubles down with that courage, leaning into Arat's blade, showing Negan that she's ready to die. And Negan is impressed. He doesn't want to kill someone like that. He considers it more fun and more productive to break them. Meanwhile, Negan viewed Spencer's attempt to kiss his ass and get him to kill Rick for him as a sneaky act of cowardice, and that disgusts Negan, and Spencer paid the price for it. And then with Olivia, Negan's logic was the same for killing Glenn. Remember, Glenn didn't attack Negan, Daryl did, but he killed Glenn to paralyze the group with intimidation. So when one person acts out, another random person will get punished. It's like Russian roulette, anyone can go at any time, and it keeps everyone from turning on him at once or turning a lone assassin into a martyr. It's screwed up, but it's effective. And it's that same practical thinking that leads Negan to taking Eugene with him instead of killing him. Like Daryl, he sees something useful in a guy that can make bullets. So, just like the massacre that opened this season, Rick is left without a critical piece of his offense. Okay, moving on to this scene in the jail cell, where Michonne inspires Rick with this moving speech about how she realized that they can't take down the Saviors alone, which echoed the conversation between Enid and Sasha earlier. But why did the scene begin with Rick staring at his axe and this note that he found on the houseboat? So on a literal level, Rick's axe is his only weapon right now, which is useless against an army of armed saviors. And this note reminds him that despite scoring all those guns on the houseboat, he still lost them at the end of the day. But these two objects also work on a metaphorical level. So without his gun, Rick still doesn't feel like his whole sheriff self. And the note reminds him that no matter how many victories he gets, they're all still losses under Negan. And that a life under Negan's rule isn't worth living if he keeps ending their lives at any random moment. Therefore, Rick has to fight. And that brings us to our closing images. This extended montage that mirrors both the opening scene of this episode and the opening episode of this season. Maggie again mourns Glenn and Abraham, looking out past the hilltop walls in hopes of Glenn coming back to her, and in a way, he kinda does. Because for the first time since the season premiere, the gang is back together, including Daryl and Jesus, and Glenn and Abraham too, well, their corpses, all united under one common purpose: to avenge the deaths of Glenn and Abraham, and sure, Denise, Spencer, and Olivia too, by gearing up for war. And then Daryl returns Rick's Colt Python, restoring the authority that he's been missing all this time. And these shots of everyone's faces is a callback to the Negan lineup that started the season, except now it's inverted. The faces of fear have transformed into faces of hope. And as they march to the house, hopefully to toss Gregory out a window or something, they have never looked more alive this season, because their hearts are still beating. Now, before I get to some lingering questions, I wanted to give a quick look at the promo footage from the second half of the season, which returns in February. So in a clip for episode 9, we see Jesus telling Rick about the kingdom.
I think it's time I introduce you to Ezekiel, King Ezekiel.
And the other footage that we've seen shows Rick making a pitch to Ezekiel in the auditorium of the kingdom to unite their forces, along with some going down between Richard and that dick savior Jared from episode 2. So I predict in episode 9, the first shots of this war against the saviors will be fired. And since Rick and the rest will be at the kingdom, I think we're gonna see how Carol and Morgan react to the bad news of everyone's deaths. They're gonna be like, Oh no, not Spencer and Olivia. We also get this mysterious shot of a porcupine walker sneaking up behind Rick with a bunch of spikes poking out of him. Now this looks awesome. In the comics, some characters do use walkers in creative ways, but I don't remember seeing this exactly. So if the show does go in this direction, I'm really excited to see what kind of weaponized walkers they assemble for this oncoming war. Like maybe they'll build like a catapult made of walker arms and legs. I don't know guys, the possibilities are endless. Okay, a few lingering questions. 1, who is the mysterious person in boots? Do you think they're connected to the houseboat, or was this just like a random passerby? And do you think this is someone that we already know, or a brand new character? 2, do you think Dwight helped Daryl escape? And if so, does this make Dwight a good person? I feel like every time Negan hits on Sherry, we get this sad reaction shot of Dwight looking miserable, and I think the show really wants us to feel sympathy of this guy. I mean, come on, that guy got a bite to the dick. How could you not feel sympathy for him? And then finally, did Spencer deserve to die? Now, his death means the official end of the Monroe family, and even though I think the show wanted us to kind of hate Spencer at times, I also feel kind of bad that his thoughtful approach to problem solving and compromise, which he inherited from Deanna's experience as a congresswoman, is now absent from this world, with no one left to carry that torch. Now, I know this is a Walking Dead, and this is a dictatorship, and it's us or them, but I also think the show works best when Rick's leadership methods are tested. Okay, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. It's been really great breaking down The Walking Dead over this half season, so check out my breakdowns of all the other episodes, and keep an eye out for future Walking Dead videos on this channel. And of course, please hit like and subscribe to New Rockstars, and share this video with all your friends. You can also contribute to us on Patreon. Thanks so much to all of our current donors, especially Kevin Chawhan. Kevin! And for the rest of you, if you aren't currently a patron, we would love your support. You can hit me up on Twitter at EA Voss with any thoughts on The Walking Dead, or you can follow New Rockstars on Twitter at New Rockstars for updates on when our videos are coming out. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.